Isn't it funny? One royal insider once whispered, how some women are born to wear the crown, while others are born to carry its shame? You've heard her name. You've seen the headlines. You've scrolled past the memes. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But have you ever stopped to ask, why does everyone hate Sarah Ferguson? Is it because of one scandal? One tape? One toe? Or is it something deeper? A royal grudge that just never let go? Because what began as a fairy tale with red carpets and royal titles has morphed, over the years, into something much darker. A public takedown spanning decades, with no end in sight. And today, we're pulling the curtain back. Not just on the scandals, not just on the tabloid explosions, but on a woman who, for better or worse, rewrote the rules of royal disgrace and got caught in the crossfire of 1,000 flashbulbs. But before we dive into the tawdry toe photos, the leaked Epstein emails, and the £500,000 sting operation, let's start at the very beginning, with a single, innocent moment that cracked open the palace door and invited chaos inside. Because this isn't just a story about Sarah Ferguson. This is a story about power, reputation, betrayal, and what happens when the royal machine decides you're the problem. So sit tight, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the entire royal family. And trust me, the worst part isn't what she did. It's what they didn't do. Let's rewind the royal clock. It's the mid-1980s. The House of Windsor is in need of good press. The world's attention is still fixed on Princess Diana, that luminous force of glamour, grace, and tragic fragility. The cameras love her. The crowds adore her. And the monarchy, battered from years of scandal fatigue, is finally catching its breath. Enter Sarah Ferguson, a flame-haired, bubbly commoner, a childhood friend of Diana's, a woman described by the press as vivacious, spontaneous, and refreshingly normal. In other words, not royal. At least, not yet. When Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son, begins courting her, it's sold to the public as a love story. The cheeky naval officer and the fun-loving redhead. A spark of something real in a world of stiff protocol and emotionless pageantry. Their 1986 wedding is a spectacle. Millions watch. Union Jacks wave. The BBC broadcasts the ceremony live. Diana is seen beaming in the pews. The royal brand, at least for that moment, feels almost human. But here's the thing no one tells you about being the fun royal. The moment you step out of line, the palace doesn't laugh. It recoils. And that's where Fergie's problems began. From day one, Sarah Ferguson was loud. Not just in volume, in presence. She laughed at inappropriate times. She cracked jokes that didn't land in Windsor's marble corridors. She wasn't elegant. She wasn't slim. She wasn't, and this is key, Diana. And the press noticed. The same tabloids that once praised her charm began mocking her chunkiness. The same editors who celebrated her warmth began branding her vulgar. She was suddenly Fergie the freeloader, the Duchess of York, a walking punchline in a hat. Do you see the pattern? First they lift you up, then they sharpen the knives. And then they wait. Wait for what, you ask? The fall. Now, let's be fair. Sarah Ferguson didn't make things easy for herself. She craved the spotlight, but hated the rules. She played the victim, but courted media deals. And when things got tough, she didn't retreat quietly. She doubled down. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, cracks began to form. Her marriage with Prince Andrew strained. Rumors swirled. He was often away with the Royal Navy. She was spotted at parties. Tabloids alleged affairs. The palace kept its lips tightly sealed, but the media didn't. Then came the separation in 1992. Not a divorce, not yet, but enough distance to make headlines. And with that distance came the infamous photographs. Let's not pretend we don't know which ones. Yes, those ones. The toe-sucking incident. A sun-drenched villa. A tan American businessman. Sarah, lounging in a bikini, unaware of the paparazzi lens aimed like a sniper from hundreds of feet away. When the photos dropped, they detonated. The British public, famously conservative when it comes to royal behavior, was scandalized. Tabloid editors cackled. Royal aides were reportedly horrified. But the most chilling reaction? Prince Philip. According to royal biographers, he was so disgusted, he refused to speak to Sarah for years. Wouldn't be in the same room. Wouldn't acknowledge her existence. And just like that, she became radioactive. But let me ask you something. Was that fair? Yes, the photos were embarrassing. Yes, she was still technically married at the time. But did she deserve decades of mockery, snubs, and cruel headlines? Or was she simply inconvenient? An easy target, a woman who didn't fit the mold, a royal spouse who wasn't meek, modest, or obedient. And more importantly, was her downfall orchestrated? Because here's where things get twisted. While the toe-sucking images became a permanent stain on her reputation, they weren't the end. They were just the beginning of a pattern, a cycle, scandal, shame, silence from the palace, and then the comeback attempt. Each time Sarah tried to rebuild, a charity appearance, a book launch, a heartfelt interview, the media would drag up the past. Remember the toes? Remember the debts? Remember that cash for access sting? We'll get to those, but let this sink in first. While Prince Andrew, her ex-husband, has been tied to far darker allegations involving Epstein, underage victims, and legal settlements, Sarah Ferguson has been treated, in many ways, worse by the press. Why? Because she's always been an easier scapegoat. Because she keeps coming back. And because, unlike Andrew, she doesn't have royal protection anymore. There's a moment, not often discussed, when Ferguson was caught on camera, years after her divorce, selling access to Andrew for £500,000. She needed money. She said so. And in that moment, the scandal machine roared back to life. And then, almost unbelievably, another shoe dropped. Leaked emails, showing her calling Jeffrey Epstein her supreme friend, apologizing to him, thanking him. It was 2011. Epstein was already a convicted sex offender. Suddenly, charities began cutting ties. Public opinion grew harsher, and the whispers started up again. Why is she still around? Why hasn't the palace intervened? Why does she never go away? But that last question, why doesn't she go away, says more about us than her. Why do we resent women who refuse to disappear? Why does the public tolerate multiple royal infidelities, corruption, and scandals, but refuse to extend even a hint of forgiveness to Fergie? Is it her tone? Her laugh? Her past? Or is it the fact that she never followed the rules to begin with? Ask yourself this. If Sarah Ferguson had been quiet, slender, submissive, and photogenic, would the press have forgiven her? Would the palace? Would we? As we unravel this saga, remember, it's not just about toe-sucking photos or Epstein emails. It's about power. It's about media vendettas. And it's about a woman who, no matter how many times the palace turned its back, refused to fade into obscurity. She may not be likable. She may not be innocent. But she's still here. And as we peel back the layers, from secret debts to royal snubs, charity scandals to broken friendships, one thing becomes crystal clear. Sarah Ferguson didn't fall from grace. She was pushed. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when you crash the gates of one of the world's most controlled, image-obsessed institutions, and you don't bother to play by its rules? What if you never even learned the rules to begin with? Sarah Ferguson didn't just marry into the royal family. She exploded into it. Loud, warm, unapologetic. A woman who didn't whisper behind palace walls, she hollered through them. And from the very beginning, the institution bristled. Because this wasn't a royal court built for firecrackers. It was built for shadows. And Fergie? She walked in like a spotlight. Let's start with the basics. Born in 1959, Sarah Margaret Ferguson came from a respectable, upper-middle-class background. Her father was Major Ronald Ferguson, a polo manager and friend of Prince Philip, and her mother, Susan Barantes, would later move to Argentina and marry an Argentinian polo player. That's important because abandonment would become a thread in Sarah's personal narrative, one she rarely spoke about until later. But in those early days, she seemed perfect for royal life. She'd grown up around horses. She'd dined with aristocrats. She was sporty, confident, and had a wild streak that, at first, seemed charming. When Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son, re-entered her life in the mid-1980s, sparks flew. They'd known each other as children, crossed paths at polo matches, and by 1985, they were officially dating. It didn't take long for the public to take notice. Sarah was different from Diana, and that was her selling point. Where Diana was soft-spoken and ethereal, Sarah was cheeky and magnetic. Where Diana played the shy, reluctant bride, Sarah grinned through crowds like she was born to be there. And for a moment, just a moment, the monarchy liked it. Or at least, they pretended to. Their engagement was announced in March 1986. Sarah was given a ruby engagement ring, Andrew's choice, meant to match her red hair. A sweet detail, a romantic gesture. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The palace, that ancient, creaking machine of propriety and image, didn't know what to do with her. She laughed too loudly at formal dinners. She hugged the queen. Something no one did. She reportedly called Prince Philip Pa. She didn't glide, she stomped. And most scandalous of all, she had opinions. Real ones. Sarah once described her own arrival at the palace as a bull in a china shop. And she wasn't wrong. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't in a shop. She was in a minefield. From the wedding day, the contrast was obvious. On July 23, 1986, Sarah Ferguson became the Duchess of York. The ceremony was grand, the carriage ride iconic, the photographs picture-perfect. But behind closed doors, the honeymoon was short, and we're not just talking about the trip. Prince Andrew, still actively serving in the Royal Navy, was frequently away. Weeks at sea turned into months. Communication was spotty. And Sarah? She was left in the royal fishbowl, alone, scrutinized, and untrained. Now imagine this. You've just married into the most judgmental family in the world. Your husband is gone. You're trying to raise 2 daughters. And every outfit you wear, every word you say, every calorie you eat, is front-page news. Sound like a dream? Or a nightmare? Because the press, initially intrigued by fun Fergie, turned quickly. They mocked her weight gain during pregnancy. They ran side-by-sides with Diana, calling Sarah the B-side. They labeled her the Duchess of Pork, repeatedly. That nickname? It stuck for years. And where was the palace? Silent. That silence, that cold, calculating stillness, is what truly set the stage for Fergie's implosion. She wasn't protected. She wasn't shielded. She was left to fend for herself in the media lion's den. And she did what any woman drowning in headlines might do. She tried to reclaim the narrative. She gave interviews. She joked about the press. She leaned into the cheeky label. But it wasn't enough. Because Sarah Ferguson had done something far worse than make headlines. She had become unpredictable. And if there's one thing Buckingham Palace can't stand, it's a loose cannon. Do you want to know what truly sealed her fate? It wasn't a single scandal. It was her refusal to disappear. Diana, despite her own struggles, knew how to walk the tightrope. She could command the press and maintain royal mystique. Fergie? She stumbled across that rope in muddy boots. When she laughed, it was too loud. When she cried, it was too public. When she danced at nightclubs, it made tabloid covers. And the royal family, allergic to disorder, began closing ranks. She was gently pushed to the outer orbit. Less royal engagements. Fewer appearances. Subtle exclusions. All under the guise of privacy. But make no mistake, it was exile. Now let's pause here. Because this is where things get psychological. Ask yourself, how does it feel to be loved publicly one year and ridiculed the next? How does it feel to be embraced as a new princess and then discarded like an embarrassment? Sarah Ferguson was never trained for royal life. She was expected to absorb it, to mimic it, to endure it. And when she couldn't, they didn't help her. They just watched her drown. There's a particular anecdote, quietly mentioned in biographies, that says everything. At a royal event, Sarah accidentally spilled wine on a guest. It wasn't major. The woman laughed. But Prince Philip, watching from across the room, allegedly muttered under his breath. Typical. That word, typical, haunted her for years. She was typical Sarah. Too loud. Too messy. Too much. Not royal. Not graceful. Not welcome. And that stigma followed her like a cloud. By the early 1990s, the writing was on the wall. Her marriage was disintegrating. The press was out for blood. And the palace? Watching. Always watching, but never stepping in. That's the contradiction that defines Sarah Ferguson's early royal years. She was in the family, but never of the family. Welcomed, but resented. Needed for headlines, but punished for them. Tolerated, until she became inconvenient. And that break, that silent rupture? It wasn't loud. It wasn't official. It wasn't dramatic. But it was fatal. Because once the institution decided she was more liability than asset, everything changed. Suddenly, her appearances were minimized. Her comments were policed, and behind the scenes, whispers grew louder. She's damaging the monarchy. She's embarrassing the queen. She's a risk. And yet, through it all, she stayed. Not because she was desperate, but because she believed she still belonged. That belief, it would soon be shattered. In 1992, Sarah Ferguson was still technically married to Prince Andrew, but the separation had already been announced. She was living mostly apart, trying to co-parent, trying to navigate a role that didn't come with a manual. And then came the Bahamas. A sunny holiday, a few days away from the spotlight. Her daughters in tow, a friend by her side, American businessman John Bryan. What happened next? Was caught by a camera lens so far away, it may as well have been a sniper scope. The photos? Unthinkable by royal standards. Her in a bikini, him kissing her toes, lying together, giggling, unaware. And when those photos were splashed across every paper in the UK, it was game over. Not just for the marriage, not just for Sarah's image, but for any hope she had of rejoining the inner circle. Prince Philip, allegedly so disgusted, refused to be in the same room as her for decades. The Queen, reportedly devastated, went quiet. And the British public? They laughed. They mocked. They branded her again, but this time, not as a freeloader, as a disgrace. But here's the question nobody asked. Where were the warnings? Where was the support? Where was the palace when she was spinning out in real time? Because this wasn't a betrayal. This was a woman drowning, and the monarchy watching from the shore. Sarah Ferguson didn't break into the institution. She was let in, and then left out in the cold. But the real damage wasn't just reputational. It was emotional, personal, psychological. And what came next wasn't redemption. It was survival. She would need money. She would need attention. And eventually, she would need forgiveness. But before any of that, she would need to be caught, on tape, doing something that made even the tow headlines seem tame. And that was just around the corner. You know the photo. Even if you've never seen it, you know it. Sarah Ferguson, a private villa, a sun chair, a man, and a moment so personal, so strange, so British tabloid perfect. It was destined to go viral before the word viral even existed. But this wasn't just about one tow, or one kiss, or one sun-drenched holiday. This was the setup, the trapdoor, the moment that sealed Fergie's fate as the royal embarrassment who never went away. Because behind the photos was something far more chilling. A system ready to pounce. A press machine hungry for scandal. And a woman, slowly, tragically, walking into the lion's den, barefoot. Let's go there. Summer, 1992. The marriage is over in all but name. Sarah and Prince Andrew had officially separated in March. They remained cordial, even close, by royal standards. Some said too close. They would later co-parent with a level of cooperation most divorced couples would envy. But make no mistake, the love story was dead. Still, Sarah remained a royal by title. The Duchess of York. Her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, were still young. And the British public? They were watching. Everything she did. Every word. Every expression. Now imagine the pressure of that spotlight. Imagine the suffocation of living under a microscope. Then imagine trying to escape it, just for a weekend. That's what the Bahamas was supposed to be. A break. A breather. A private family getaway with her daughters and friends. But nothing is truly private when your name is Sarah Ferguson. Especially not when you're still, technically, married to the Queen's son. Enter John Bryan, an American financial advisor. Handsome, tan, charismatic, a friend, maybe more. Certainly close enough to vacation with. Sarah, reportedly, was relaxed, happy, finally at ease. She had no idea she was being watched. Somewhere, far away, across the property line, hidden from view, was a long-lens paparazzi camera, the kind used for war zones, the kind that could read a newspaper headline from a football field away, the kind that didn't miss a thing. And what it captured, over the course of days, was a slow-motion scandal. Sarah in a swimsuit, John Bryan rubbing her shoulders, laughing, whispering, and then the kiss. But not on the lips, on the toes. It was weird. It was intimate. And for the British press, it was gold. The toe-sucking scandal wasn't just salacious. It was humiliating. It wasn't some elegant, tragic infidelity like Charles and Camilla. It wasn't even a private affair gone public. It was silly, graphic, utterly memeable, before memes were even a thing. And that's what made it unforgivable. Because the British monarchy can survive scandal. What it can't survive is being laughed at. Let's paint the picture. The photos land like a nuclear bomb. It's August 1992. The tabloids go into meltdown. Front pages blare. Fergie's holiday shocker. Royal toe job. Palace in turmoil over intimate photos. Even the usually reserved broadsheets cover it. International press picks it up. Late-night talk shows mock it. It's not just a scandal, it's a cultural moment. But while the world laughed, the palace did something far more devastating. It froze her out. Sarah Ferguson was staying at Balmoral, the Queen's Scottish residence, when the photos hit. That's right. She was under the same roof as the royal family when her worst moment became global news. According to insiders, Prince Philip was apoplectic. He reportedly refused to be in her presence. Wouldn't speak to her. Wouldn't make eye contact. Some say he ordered her bags packed and insisted she leave. The Queen, typically composed, was said to be deeply hurt. Her affection for Sarah had been genuine, but now her hands were tied by protocol and public embarrassment. And Prince Andrew? Silent. Always silent. His loyalty to Sarah would remain, but his protection would not. Now here's the twist nobody talks about. John Bryan, the man in the photo, later claimed that he wasn't sucking her toes at all. He said it was misrepresented, that he was whispering to her foot, making her laugh, that the photos were cropped and spun to create maximum damage. Does it matter? In the court of public opinion, not at all. Because by the time Bryan gave his version, the headlines were already written in stone. The damage was done. And Fergie? She was a punchline. Let's not forget the emotional toll. This wasn't just a scandal. It was an international humiliation. For a mother. For a public figure. For a woman still trying to maintain some connection to the royal family. If not for herself, then for her children. And yet, the blame was all hers. Not the paparazzi who stalked her. Not the papers that published the images. Not the man involved. Her. She was the disgrace. The failure. The outsider who never learned to behave. And that, more than the photos themselves, is what stung the most. But let's ask the uncomfortable question. Was it a setup? Not in the conspiracy sense. No MI6 hiding in the bushes. But culturally? Absolutely. Because the press had been circling Sarah for years. Waiting. Prodding. Hoping. The Duchess of York had become tabloid prey, and this? This was the kill shot. And the palace? They didn't just let it happen. They allowed the perception to take root. She's not one of us. She's a liability. She's damaged the brand. Never mind that other royals had committed far worse indiscretions. Never mind that Prince Charles had, by then, confessed to adultery. Or that Prince Andrew's own behavior would later draw even more horrifying attention. Sarah's sin was visibility. She embarrassed the institution. And that was unforgivable. From that moment on, Sarah Ferguson was untouchable. Not in the glamorous way. In the radioactive way. Invitations dried up. Royal engagements disappeared. Tabloid coverage turned openly mocking. She tried to apologize. Tried to reframe. Tried to move on. But the photo, that one photo, lingered like smoke in a closed room. And here's the psychological damage nobody measured. Sarah Ferguson began to monetize the image the press gave her. If they were going to call her a joke, she'd laugh with them. If they were going to label her a freeloader, she'd lean into product endorsements. If the palace wouldn't protect her, she'd protect herself with money. But when desperation meets public shaming, the next decisions aren't always wise. And for Fergie, the next one would be a disaster. A sting operation. A £500,000 offer. A tape. A secret camera. And the deal that nearly destroyed her, again. Because scandals come and go in royal life. But betrayal? That sticks. How do you outrun a story the world refuses to forget? Better question. Can you ever escape a reputation the media writes in permanent ink? Because in 1992, Sarah Ferguson didn't just face a scandal. She got branded. The British press didn't call it an affair. They didn't frame it as heartbreak or betrayal. They framed it like a lurid seaside postcard of humiliation. And humiliation is the media's favorite export. Because royal scandal can be tragic, dangerous, or explosive. But the moment the world laughs at a royal, that moment becomes immortal. And that's the complicated knot at the heart of this chapter. It wasn't the intimacy that enraged the public most. It was the ridicule. And ridicule is much harder to forgive than rebellion. Let's examine the timeline first, so we can unpack the psychology. In March 1992, Sarah and Prince Andrew officially announced their separation. That public statement was meant to quell rumors, manage expectations, provide breathing room. And historically, that's often where royal stories go quiet, fade into polite society's sidelines. But Sarah Ferguson was not living in polite society's sidelines. She was living inside the monarchy's headline economy. By August 1992, a mere 5 months later, paparazzi images emerged from the Bahamas, showing her and John Bryan in unmistakably relaxed holiday familiarity. The press labeled Bryan a financial advisor, a business confidant, and, later, her romantic interest. But nobody remembers those polite descriptors. The public remembers the photo that became a shorthand. The toes, the pose, the absurdity, the optics of aristocratic looseness meeting tabloid spectacle. It became less a story and more a symbol. Fergie, the royal who couldn't behave, couldn't hide, couldn't disappear. Here's the real pivot point of this chapter: branding. The monarchy itself is a brand. A 1,000-year-old one. It is built on dignity, continuity, tradition, and choreographed mystique. And Sarah Ferguson, overnight, was recast as its failing sub-brand. Ask yourself this, honestly. Do we judge scandals on severity or spectacle? Because by 1992, Prince Charles had already faced accusations of adultery, secretly recorded phone calls, and emotional fractures that shook the crown itself. Charles's scandals were moral breaches, but they were steeped in gravitas, monarchy, legitimacy, Shakespearean betrayal. Sarah's breach was circus-like. When the press published those photos, they didn't just report the moment. They packaged it with slogans, sarcasm, nicknames, public sneering. Her weight and appearance, long scrutinized unfairly, now became a cudgel. Freeloader Fergie, the Duchess of York, the York freeloader, vulgar, unroyal, ungainly. This is how branding works at its most ruthless. Highlight the difference. Attach ridicule. Repeat until it sticks. And stick? It did. But let's break down why this mattered beyond the tabloids. Diana was in the prime of her press dominance. Fergie was her mirror opposite in media tone. So what did the press do? They built an archetype. Diana equals the principled princess wronged by the crown. Fergie equals the punchline princess the crown regrets allowing in. Do you see it now? This isn't just monarchy versus tabloid. This is narrative warfare for public affection. And Sarah Ferguson didn't just lose this war. She became its mascot. Now, let's talk about the deeper cultural currents. British media culture in the 1990s was uniquely brutal toward women who challenged the monarchy's aesthetic or behavioral expectations. When a male royal stumbled, it triggered debates of succession, relevance, protocol, legacy, constitutional tension. When Sarah stumbled, it triggered caricature. And caricature lives longer than constitutional concern. Audience question break for retention. Ask yourself, while watching, who profits most when a woman is easier to mock than understand? Because understanding a royal misstep requires nuance. And nuance takes effort. Hate takes seconds. But hold on, because this is where the contradiction sharpens. Sarah Ferguson carried warmth that Diana lacked in private. Diana's friends called her magnetic, principled, but emotionally volatile. Sarah's friends, and even Andrew later, described her as funny, generous, affectionate, maternal, emotionally present. So why was she hated while others were empathetically debated? Because empathy doesn't attach itself to spectacle. It attaches itself to narrative authority. And the press never gave her narrative authority. They gave her absurdity. Let's unpack the mechanism of reputation entrapment. Once those photos hit the press, the palace did not publicly defend her. Not because they approved, far from it, but because she no longer fit within their press strategy. The royals handle scandals through 3 institutional options: containment, counter-narrative, quiet exile. Sarah received exile dressed like containment. Let me say that in the rhythm of YouTube retention pacing. Royal silence, public laughter, narrative death, repeat forever. Now, here's a moment the tabloids buried later, but we can surface now. John Bryan claimed, years later, that the press had misrepresented the images. It wasn't literal sucking. It was a moment made to look worse through framing, cropping, and intention. His version introduced a key reframing point. The day she stopped being a person and started being a product. But that reframing never reached redemption velocity, because the palace was no longer invested in resetting her narrative. The tabloids were too invested in weaponizing it. So Sarah did what very few royals ever do. She tried to monetize her own mockery. Not immediately, but soon enough that the public assumed it was always the plan. And that matters for later chapters. Her reputation didn't just fracture socially. It fractured commercially. She would soon become a royal-adjacent commodity rather than a royal asset. And that shift would echo in every future financial decision she made, including the 2010 sting we've only teased so far. But for now, let's keep building the psychological pressure chamber. Because once a woman is caricatured by the press, her actions stop being judged individually. They get judged cumulatively, historically, and eternally. Sarah Ferguson became a walking archive of tabloid blunders. Let's ask the next audience question directly, the way YouTube loves it. Do we hate her choices, or do we hate that she never went away long enough to forget them? Because forgettable scandal is forgivable scandal. Unforgettable scandal? That becomes identity. One more crucial point before we end this chapter: irony and asymmetry. Male royals get scandal arcs. Sarah Ferguson got a scandal epic. An epic branding is a different beast. When the press discovered she was fun, they said she was unroyal. When they discovered she needed money, they said she was opportunistic. When they discovered she was maternal, they said she was emotional. And when they discovered she was still socially close to Andrew after divorce, they said she was enmeshed, inappropriate, undignified. Nobody could decide which sin was hers. So the press packaged them all. That's the thing about hate-based branding. It doesn't need internal consistency. It thrives on contradiction. Now we arrive at the pacing beat that tees us up for Chapter 4. A reputation became a caricature. A caricature became a narrative. A narrative became a trap. And the trap? It wasn't sprung yet. Because the next phase of her public legacy wouldn't involve photos taken from afar. It would involve audio taken in secret. And secret audio scandals? They hit different. Because they sound like intent. And intent, unlike toes, is something you have to explain. Unless no one gives you the microphone. And Fergie would soon get the microphone, through a hidden camera, whether she wanted it or not. Because the press had been waiting for more. And this time, they'd set the bait. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Can royalty go broke? Not in fairy tales. Not in Disney scripts. Not in the pages of glittering history books. But this isn't a fairy tale. And Sarah Ferguson? She wasn't a Disney duchess. Because while the tabloids were busy mocking her weight, and the royals were busy distancing themselves from her shadow, behind the scenes, another story was quietly unraveling. She was drowning in debt. Not just a little. Not just a few unpaid credit card bills. We're talking millions. Loans. IOUs. Bailouts. And a series of desperate financial decisions that would one day land her in front of a hidden camera, whispering promises of access for cash. But before that tape ever rolled, the debt came first. So let's rewind the clock. It's the mid to late 1990s. The toe scandal had detonated. Her marriage to Prince Andrew is officially dissolved, and the monarchy has slammed its gilded doors. Sarah is no longer a working royal. No more public funding. No more taxpayer-supported wardrobe budgets or security entourages. She's out. Technically titled, but functionally unemployed. And here's the brutal reality. Being royal adjacent without being royal supported is a financial death sentence. Because you're still expected to look the part. Still expected to show up in designer dresses. Still expected to maintain appearances. But now, you pay for it yourself. And Sarah, with 2 young daughters, mounting legal bills, and a reputation so toxic that no aristocratic circle dared touch her, was hemorrhaging cash. So what did she do? She pivoted. She tried everything. Books, TV appearances, interviews, endorsements, business ventures. And at first, it looked like she might survive it. In 1996, she released her autobiography, My Story. A tell-all that sold well, but not enough to fix her finances. Then came children's books. Then came U.S. talk shows. She even became a Weight Watchers spokesperson for a time. But here's the catch. Public ridicule doesn't generate lasting income. It generates curiosity. One-off bursts of attention, but not stability. And behind the smiles, Sarah was falling deeper into the red. Let's talk numbers. By the early 2000s, reports began to surface that Sarah's debts had ballooned. Some said £2 million, others claimed over £5 million. She denied the highest figures, but confirmed that yes, she was struggling. There were whispers of unpaid staff, of bounced checks, of borrowing from friends, and from Andrew. That's right. Despite their divorce, Prince Andrew reportedly continued to help her financially. Their strange, codependent relationship raised eyebrows, but it was clear. Sarah had no one else. In private, friends would later say she was panicked, ashamed, and constantly juggling. At one point, she allegedly asked Andrew to remarry, not for romance, but for finances. To regain royal support. To stop the spiral. He declined. Publicly, she smiled. Privately, she was living on the brink. Let's pause here and really ask, how does a duchess go broke? The answer is brutal. Because royalty, for all its pomp, doesn't pay salaries. And when you fall from grace, no one teaches you how to land. Sarah had spent years inside a system that groomed her for ribbon cuttings, not balance sheets. Her financial literacy was limited. Her business instincts? Questionable. She tried to build empires, and failed. She launched Budgie Books, inspired by a cartoon character she co-created. She co-founded lifestyle brands. She attempted a wellness business. She even dipped into the US reality TV space. But for every opportunity she touched, there were two waiting to implode. Bad deals, bad management, and worst of all, bad optics. Because when the public already hates you, every new venture looks like a grift. Here's where the narrative turns tragic. In 2009, Sarah was accused of defaulting on rent for her apartment in the exclusive Mayfair neighborhood. She denied it, but her legal team scrambled. Around that same time, she reportedly owed nearly £1 million to a publishing company for advances on books that underperformed. Worse still, she allegedly used charity funds to pay personal staff, a claim she later dismissed as a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Her image shifted from messy duchess to financial parasite. Freeloader Fergie was now more than a nickname. It was a brand. And that brand, it had value to the wrong people. Enter the undercover sting. But we're not quite there yet. First, you need to understand just how desperate she really was. Because by 2010, the year of the infamous News of the World tape, Sarah Ferguson was on the edge of financial ruin. Her ex-husband was under pressure. Her charities were pulling away. Her public gigs were drying up. And the whispers had grown louder. She'll do anything for money. She's dangerous. She's selling off access. And then, the trap was set. But before we dive into the sting itself, there's one last emotional beat to sit with. Sarah Ferguson, for all her faults, all her mistakes, was fundamentally alone. No royal support. No institutional protection. No financial safety net. And while other disgraced royals were shielded by PR teams, legacy titles, or discreet inheritances, Sarah was hanging by a thread. She had burned through goodwill, burned through cash, burned through options. And when someone offered her £500,000 to do what she claimed others were doing anyway, she said yes. But the camera was already rolling, and the scandal that followed would make toe-sucking look tame. What happens when desperation meets opportunity, and someone's already pressing record? Let me ask it another way. How far would you go for £500,000? For Sarah Ferguson, the answer came in the form of a wire, a whisper, and a sting operation that would become one of the most jaw-dropping scandals in royal-adjacent history. And this time, the headlines didn't just laugh. They accused. Because in May 2010, the public didn't just see another Fergie faux pas. They saw a duchess offering access to the Queen's son for cash. No more metaphors. No toe jokes. This was real. This was tape. This was betrayal. Or was it? Let's roll the scene back and see exactly what happened inside the London hotel that day. Because it didn't just change her life. It changed the way the public talked about royal influence itself. The setup. The reporter's name was Mazhar Mahmood, but you may know him better by his infamous alias, the Fake Sheikh, a notorious journalist with News of the World, a paper already famous for explosive tabloid exposés and later, illegal phone hacking. Mahmood had built his career on one simple tactic: Bait and trap. He'd pose as a wealthy Middle Eastern businessman looking for shady deals, high society connections, or celebrity access. And again, it worked. Actors, politicians, footballers, models. Mahmoud had taken them all down. And in 2010, his target was Sarah Ferguson. Why her? Because she had a weakness: debt, disgrace, and isolation. The perfect storm. Here's how the sting worked. Mahmoud, posing as a billionaire businessman, arranged a meeting with Sarah. He claimed he wanted help making lucrative connections in the UK. He wanted introductions, high-level access, political introductions, royal handshakes. She agreed to meet at a plush London hotel. She didn't know the room was bugged, didn't know the drinks were laced with motive, didn't know her trust was being sold back to the public at £2.20 per newspaper. And in that room, sitting across from a man she believed was serious, legitimate, and discreet, Sarah Ferguson said this: "Look after me, and he'll look after you. You'll get it back tenfold. I can open any door you want. You just have to give me £500,000. Let that land." She didn't just say she could introduce you to Prince Andrew. She said she could guarantee access. And the price? £500,000. Now pause, because this is where the morality and motive blur. Did Sarah actually have the power to broker favors through Prince Andrew? Maybe, maybe not. But in that moment, she believed she did. That's what made it scandalous. Not just the money, not just the secret camera, but the idea that a former royal was now selling the crown by the hour. And when the video dropped, it exploded. Sky News, CNN, BBC, ABC. It was global within hours. Every tabloid ran it. Every late-night show mocked it. Every royal commentator sharpened their knives. It wasn't just a scandal. It was confirmation. The narrative the public had been building for years: freeloader Fergie, the cash-hungry Duchess, the woman who couldn't be trusted, suddenly had evidence. On camera, in her own words, with the price tag to prove it. Let's talk damage control. The fallout was immediate. Sarah released a statement, not denying the tape, but apologizing. "I very deeply regret the situation and the embarrassment caused. It was a serious lapse in judgment, and my financial situation is under stress." She claimed she'd been drinking, that she was under immense pressure, that she'd been misled. And to be clear, she had been. This was entrapment journalism, no doubt about it. Ethically gray, professionally ruthless. But the public? They didn't care. Because Sarah didn't just fall into the trap. She built a tin inside it. And as the cameras rolled, so did the narrative. But here's where things get even more complicated. Where was Prince Andrew in all of this? The man she offered access to? Silent. No public defense. No visible support. No statement clearing her name. And that silence? It screamed. Because even though Sarah and Andrew remained close, co-parenting their daughters, even reportedly sharing the royal lodge at times, the royal wall went up fast. The palace issued a brief, icy comment. The Duke of York was not aware or involved in any of the discussions. Translation? She's on her own. And that, again, is the pattern that keeps repeating. Fergie gets into trouble. The press devours her. And the monarchy washes its hands. But here's the twist the public missed. This scandal wasn't just about Sarah. It was also the first time the world truly questioned how influence works inside the royal institution. Because whether or not Sarah could deliver on her promise, the fact that she believed she could open a can of worms. How much behind-the-scenes access is available for the right price? How many former royals are being paid to open doors in private boardrooms? Where is the line between networking and profiteering? Sarah's scandal didn't just embarrass the monarchy, it implicated it, even indirectly. Because if the public believed she was telling the truth, then the crown wasn't just symbolic. It was transactional, and that revelation was nuclear. Let's talk career fallout. Overnight, her brand collapsed. Again, deals were pulled. Appearances canceled. Charities quietly stepped back. Even the Weight Watchers partnership she'd held onto for years? Gone. She became toxic, unhireable, untouchable, and yet, paradoxically, more famous than ever. Because scandals sell. And Sarah Ferguson, like it or not, had just delivered a blockbuster. But for her, it was the lowest point of her life. In interviews years later, she'd refer to that day as her rock bottom. She said she was humiliated, ashamed, and broke. Not just financially, emotionally. But here's where the contradictions surface again. Despite everything, despite the sting, the tape, the headlines, she survived. Not because she cleared her name, not because the public forgave her, but because scandal no longer shocked anyone. That's how many times she'd already fallen. The Sarah Ferguson brand became impervious. Not in a good way, but in a resigned way. Like an old sitcom rerun. Predictable, mildly entertaining. A cautionary tale you no longer take seriously. And that's almost more devastating than cancellation. Because irrelevance dressed as notoriety is a cruel fate. Let's ask the audience directly, YouTube style. Do you believe she was malicious or just desperate? Was it a betrayal of the monarchy or a symptom of being abandoned by it? Because if she had been supported financially, if she'd been trained post-divorce to manage her affairs, if the institution had helped her land instead of watching her fall, would that sting tape even exist? Or did the system, once again, set her up to fail? You decide. But we're not done yet. Because just when the scandal seemed to fade, a new name entered the story. One that would shake the monarchy's foundations even harder than Sarah ever could. A man who made cash for access look quaint. Jeffrey Epstein. And Sarah's connection to him would come back to haunt her in ways she never expected. And this time, it wasn't a camera that caught her. It was an email. It was just a few lines, tucked away in an old email. Dated, clipped, polite. But in the world of royal scandals, a few lines is all it takes to reignite a firestorm. Because in 2011, nearly a year after the sting that made her a public pariah once again, Sarah Ferguson's name surfaced in connection with a man whose crimes would later bring down billionaires, politicians, and even threaten the British monarchy itself. Jeffrey Epstein. And this time, it wasn't a blurry photo, or a sting camera, or a whispered rumor. It was her own words. And the phrase that detonated like a bomb, my supreme friend. Let that settle. Because that wasn't just an unfortunate association. That was a name drop heard across the world. And it would cast a shadow over Sarah Ferguson's already crumbling reputation in ways she could never have imagined. Let's rewind again. By 2011, Jeffrey Epstein was already known to U.S. authorities. He had pleaded guilty in 2008 to procuring an underage girl for prostitution and served a reduced sentence in Florida. The world hadn't yet seen the full horror of what would emerge years later. The trafficking networks, the powerful elite implicated, the sickening scope of it all. But Epstein's name was already radioactive. So when it emerged that Sarah Ferguson had accepted financial help from him, and even written him a thank you note calling him her supreme friend, the backlash was immediate. Let's be crystal clear. Sarah claimed she didn't know where the money came from. She said the money had gone toward paying off some of her debts, indirectly, and that it was arranged by Prince Andrew. But none of that mattered in the court of public opinion. Because now she wasn't just the Duchess with bad judgment. She was the Duchess with dangerous friends. Let's break it down. The financial help Epstein allegedly gave was not directly to Sarah. It was routed through intermediaries. But it helped settle some of the £15,000 she owed to her former personal assistant. Not exactly a royal ransom, but symbolically, it was damning. Here's a convicted sex offender, infamous even then, bailing out a woman who had already been labeled a freeloader in the press. And worse, she wrote him a note that would later leak. A note in which she thanked him for his generosity, for his support, for not making her feel compromised. And she signed it. With love and thanks, Sarah. Let's pause. Because if the tape from 2010 made the public gasp, this note made them gag. Now here's where things get even more tangled. Prince Andrew, as we now know, was deeply tied to Jeffrey Epstein. His infamous 2019 BBC interview, the one where he denied ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, denied sweating, and claimed he had no regrets, would later destroy what remained of his public reputation. But in 2011, the cracks were only starting to show. And Sarah? Sarah was caught in the crossfire. Because while she insisted she abhorred Epstein's crimes, while she apologized profusely for ever taking the money, while she claimed she deeply regretted the association, the damage was irreversible. Charities began dropping her. Public trust, already paper-thin, collapsed. And the royal press office? Stone-cold silence. Once again, the palace left her to twist in the wind. Let's stop for a second and ask the real question. Why? Why was Sarah Ferguson, a woman with no formal royal role, no real power, no actual influence, continually placed at the center of national outrage? Why did her associations trigger such ferocious condemnation, while other royals seemed to skate past far worse? Because this wasn't just about Epstein. This was about optics. Sarah Ferguson had become the visual embodiment of everything the monarchy wanted to deny. Loose moral associations, commercial desperation, emotional volatility, and above all, bad press. But isn't that exactly what made her a scapegoat? Because while Prince Andrew's connection to Epstein was far deeper, far darker, and far more damaging, Sarah's name was the easier one to stain. She didn't have HRH protections. She didn't have a palace staff to spin for her. She didn't have a PR wall of denial. What she had was an apology letter. And in the eyes of the public, that was blood in the water. Let's revisit the quote that still haunts her. "My supreme friend." It's not just cringeworthy. It's devastating. Because it reveals the single most damaging thing about Sarah Ferguson's public journey. She never learned how to control her image. She thought the note would humanize her. She thought honesty would protect her. Instead, it cemented her as the Duchess who would say anything, to anyone, for financial relief or forgiveness. She didn't sound calculating. She sounded naive. And in a world of palace protocol and cutthroat press, naivety is fatal. But here's the contradiction the media rarely explores. Sarah and Andrew never really cut ties. In fact, their post-divorce closeness became a weird fascination for royal watchers. They vacationed together. They lived on the same estate. They co-parented with visible affection. So when she wrote that Epstein had helped via Andrew, she wasn't lying. But the implication? That Andrew had used his friend, a convicted sex offender, to help his ex-wife pay off debts? That was too much. And yet again, nobody from the palace stepped forward. No statement from Andrew. No clarification. No nuance. Just silence. The kind that confirms suspicion rather than erases it. And here's the emotional gut punch. In a 2011 interview, visibly distressed, her voice cracking, Sarah Ferguson said, "I am just so contrite I cannot say. I abhor pedophilia. I know what it's like to be abused, and I'm just sorry that I am such a damaged person." Read that again. "I'm just sorry that I am such a damaged person." That isn't spin. That's not PR. That's pain. Real, raw, unvarnished. And yet, it changed nothing. Because apologies don't clean up radioactive names. They just freeze them in the moment they were made. And for Sarah, that moment became yet another chapter in a never-ending epic of disgrace. Let's bring the audience back in. If you're still watching, ask yourself this. Was this woman truly dangerous? Or was she just the most convenient example of what happens when a royal goes rogue? Because while Andrew would eventually be stripped of his titles, his patronages, and his ceremonial roles, Sarah got there first. She was the test case, the punching bag, the public warning. Step out of line, and we won't just exile you. We'll let you hang yourself with your own words. But the story doesn't stop there. Because if you thought Epstein was the final chapter in Sarah's public disgrace, you'd be wrong. Because now, the whispers are no longer about her past. They're about her personality. Former staff, private employees, insiders who claim she was more than just unlucky. They said she was manipulative, volatile, hard to work for. And soon, the world would start to wonder, was Sarah Ferguson the victim of the monarchy's coldness or the architect of her own chaos? Because when the staff begin to talk, it's no longer a scandal. It's a pattern. They say you can really tell who a person is, not when they're waving to crowds, not when they're being photographed on palace balconies, but in the moments when no one's watching. Behind the curtains, in the hallway, at 6 a.m. with a steaming cup of Earl Grey and a housekeeper trembling under pressure. And for Sarah Ferguson, the woman long exiled from royal grace, this private world became the next arena of controversy. Because just when it seemed like the scandals had exhausted themselves, when the public believed they knew every inch of her downfall, a new, more insidious narrative emerged. Not about affairs, not about money, not about photos, but about how she treated people. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors turned into staff testimonials. And those testimonials painted a disturbing portrait, one where the Duchess wasn't just clumsy or naive. but manipulative, erratic, and downright cruel. So here's the question. Was Sarah Ferguson just misunderstood? Or had the cracks always been there, hidden behind her famous grin? Let's step inside the world behind the palace doors. It begins, as many stories do, with a leak. Not a tabloid front page, but a former personal assistant, speaking anonymously to a broadsheet reporter, describing their time working for the Duchess of York as exhausting, chaotic, and emotionally volatile. You never knew which version of her you were going to get. At first, it seemed like an isolated comment, an ex-employee venting frustrations, maybe with an axe to grind. But then came another, and another. Different voices, different periods of employment. Same theme. They painted Sarah as a woman oscillating between overbearing affection and sudden outbursts. A boss who would hug you one moment and then lash out the next. She was charming to guests, one said. But behind closed doors, she was demanding, forgetful, and paranoid. One former housekeeper described being asked to re-iron a blouse that had already been pressed because Sarah changed her mind about what crisp looked like. Another aide claimed they were once locked out of the house overnight after failing to deliver flowers to a media event on time, though they had been told to delay, in case paparazzi were waiting. Sound petty? Maybe. But the collective weight of these anecdotes began to stir something deeper, an image that didn't match her public one. And in royal circles, that is the true scandal. Let's be fair. Sarah Ferguson has always worn the label of warm-hearted. She's joked about her own mishaps. She's hugged cancer survivors at charity events. She's laughed at her past mistakes in interviews with Oprah, Ellen, and countless British hosts. But kindness on camera doesn't always extend behind the scenes. According to a former PR staffer, Sarah would flip during moments of stress. She could be your best friend at 9 a.m., and by 9:03 she was throwing a pen across the room because a quote was slightly wrong in a press release. Another claimed that she micromanaged everything, but remembered nothing. She'd scream that no one told her about an event, and then we'd find an email with her reply confirming it. She'd just forgotten. But she never admitted that. These aren't just diva moments. They speak to something deeper, something staffers started calling privately Fergie fog, a cloud of confusion, contradiction, and emotional unpredictability that made working for her a mental minefield. Now let's zoom out. Is this unique to Sarah? Not really. The royal family has a long history of being difficult employers. There are countless stories of Prince Charles's demands for perfectly ironed shoelaces. Princess Margaret, too, was infamous for her cutting remarks and impossible standards. But the difference? They had institutional buffers, private secretaries, palace protocols, and most importantly, power. Sarah Ferguson had none of that. She was an ex-royal, functioning in a world where she still expected staff-level obedience, but without the structure to manage it. She wanted royal treatment, without a royal role. And for the people paid to serve her, that meant emotional whiplash. Let's pivot briefly. Why does this matter? Because public image is built on personal consistency. The reason Sarah's scandals hit harder, why they lingered longer, is because her flaws always seemed to bleed into every part of her life. Finance, romance, friendships, charity, now employment. Every area she touched carried the same underlying accusation. She was unreliable, emotionally unstable, a liability. And when that reputation bleeds into your treatment of staff, it becomes toxic. One former bodyguard went even further. He claimed in an off-the-record quote that Sarah was addicted to chaos. She couldn't go a week without a mini-crisis. Whether it was drama with her daughter's schedules, or a forgotten deadline, or an invented insult from someone at a gala, she'd spiral, and then drag everyone with her. He also noted something telling. She was always convinced someone was betraying her. A tabloid mole, a jealous staffer. Sometimes she was right. Most of the time, she was just paranoid. This explains a lot. The string of PR disasters, the rushed interviews, the failed comebacks, the sting operation. It all fits into a pattern of impulsivity fueled by desperation. Not just financial, but emotional. Now here's the emotional gut punch. Several former staffers said the same line, nearly word for word. It wasn't that she was cruel. It's that she was chaotic, and you never knew which version you were going to get. One described her as exhausting but not evil. Another said she had zero boundaries, and no self-awareness. But all of them agreed on one thing. She needed help, and she never got it. And that might be the saddest line of all. Because for all her scandals, Sarah Ferguson wasn't evil. She was erratic, wounded, lonely, and in an institution that prizes control, emotional volatility is the ultimate sin. Let's turn this inward for a moment. What happens to a person already insecure, already flailing, when everyone around them is paid to smile, but secretly fears their moods? You get a powder keg of distortion. She likely didn't even know how badly she was behaving. She was in survival mode, constantly reacting, clutching onto relevance while the world labeled her a joke. That's not royalty. That's tragedy. But here's the twist. Despite all of this, despite the staff complaints, the ex-employee quotes, the rumors and allegations, some people loved working for her. There are isolated testimonies from former chefs, drivers, assistants who called her generous, sweet, down to earth. So what gives? The answer is as messy as Sarah herself. She wasn't one thing. She was a spectrum of contradictions. 1 minute, maternal, grateful, gracious. The next, panicked, dismissive, destructive. And in the absence of a formal palace system to rein her in, she became her own worst handler. Let's return to the audience one more time. Can you separate a person's pain from their personality? Do we hold people accountable for how they treat their staff, even when they're drowning themselves? Because in the modern world, how you treat your employees says more about you than your public charity work ever could. And in Sarah Ferguson's case, it might be the final, quiet scandal that truly ended her redemption arc. Because scandal can be explained. Scandal can even be forgiven. But a reputation for mistreating people? That sticks. Especially in an era when the royals are under scrutiny like never before. But if you think that was the end of the narrative, think again. Because Sarah's most famous relationship, the one that defined her early rise and permanently tied her to royalty, wasn't with Andrew. It was with Diana. And the way that friendship ended left wounds that no staff member, no charity board, no newspaper could ever truly explain. Because the next chapter wasn't about betrayal. It was about silence. And the one woman who might have understood Sarah best died estranged from her.